I am Scott Leadingham, and I am with Emily Schwing, the Inland Northwest correspondent for the Northwest News Network. Thank you for joining today, Emily.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We have a lot to cover and not a lot of time to do it in, so we'll try to get to it. But throughout the time here, if anyone is joining us live and you'd like to ask some questions about our topics today, we'll be talking about some Native American cultural issues, some salmon, some wildfires in the Northwest. Go ahead and leave those questions in the Facebook comment section. We'll try to get to them now or afterward if we can't get to them now. First, Emily, this really cool thing that you covered in Spokane, this gathering of Northwest tribes called doing Salish karaoke. What was that, and what was it like covering it?
Yeah, so the Salish karaoke contest happens annually here in Spokane, and it's part of a greater conference on Salish language. And so the karaoke contest is extremely competitive. It's well known. And basically, what Salish speakers have to do is take a song, like a popular song, and translate it into their native language and then perform it. And these performances are wild. There's costumes and there's lighting and there's like these smoke explosions, and it's like a real concert. And it was very exciting to see just how passionate people are about celebrating their language, the Salish language.
You obviously picked up, I am assuming, a few Salish words during the course of a few days there. What did you pick up? Anything special, or maybe did you learn your own name in Salish or something like that? That'd be really cool.
I did. So I got to sit for over an hour and talk with this really interesting elder. His name's Johnny R. Lee. He's from Montana. He's a member of the Kalispel tribe, and he asked me what my last name meant. My last name is Schwing. In German, it means to swing, but it really means to swing from the rope of a bell. So somewhere way back in the day when my ancestors were still in Germany, someone was ringing a bell in some German village somewhere. And so he gave me this name, and I have to look at my notes. It's really hard to say. Tululium, which conveys this idea of communication and offering information to my community. So very fitting name, and it was really special to get my Salish name from a Kalispel elder.
That is really neat. That makes me wonder what my Salish name would be. So now I'm going to go. I've heard it before, leading ham, something about pigs being in the front. So I don't know what that would be in Salish, but if anyone out there knows, please, that'd be really cool to find out. Or if anyone else out there speaks Salish or has some background in it, yeah, please share. That'd be really interesting to find out. Speaking of Native American cultural issues in north central Washington, you were just covering this issue with the Sinixt Tribe, and I might have not said that quite correctly, so please correct me. Give us
Yeah,
the
it's Sinixt.
background about what was happening with the Sinixt Tribe, how it was related to the Colville tribe and the government of British Columbia. Really fascinating issue.
Okay, so this is an issue I've been covering for almost 2 years. It's been going on for a lot longer than that, decades. So, in 1956, the last surviving member of the Sinixt tribe in Canada passed away. They come from an area that's just north of Nelson, British Columbia, so just over the border, about 2 hours drive from Spokane. Um, and after this last surviving member of the tribe in Canada passed away, the Canadian government um, said they were extinct. It was actually in Canadian law that this tribe was extinct. However, almost half of the Colville members, the enrolled members of the Colville tribes, down here on the Colville Reservation in Washington State, um, are related to Sinixt tribal members, or are actually Sinixt. And so in 2009, a man named Rick Desautel decided to bring attention to his tribe. So he crossed the border with his wife Linda, and he shot an elk without a permit, and told the Canadian government that he had done this, because he wanted to raise attention to the fact that he's a Sinixt descendant. They are not extinct, they're alive and well. And so, for almost the last 10 years, this case has been ongoing. Last spring, on March 27th, so we're just over a year out from a trial court judge's decision to acquit Rick Desautel of crimes related to illegal hunting in Canada. That decision was then appealed by the British Columbian government, so the provincial government. That appeal was denied by British Columbia's Supreme Court. There's now a second appeal in motion. We're still waiting to find out if the Provincial Court of Appeals will hear the case. The lawyer in the case who's defending Rick Desautel and the tribe says he anticipates there will be an appeal, not because Canada doesn't want to recognize the Sinixt, but because this is a landmark case with a lot of implications to come. And so it's very likely that this case could go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada in Ottawa.
So you talk about Rick Desautel hunting, and it strikes me that this is much more than just one person wanting to go hunt an elk, regardless of if that's across the border in Canada, which I'm sure has a lot of issues about permits and things. But it's almost like Rick Desautel was representing his tribe in their hunting for recognition and the fact that they are not extinct. And that just sounds so weird. I'm sorry to say extinct in reference to a group of people. So yeah, I'm sorry to say that, but so did you pick up on that?
Yeah. This is in fact the only tribe in Canada that where the Canadian government has used that language. And yes, this was a specific effort that tribal leadership knew about prior to Rick going hunting. And they said, you go hunting and we will support you. We have the legal team in place. Do it. Like, let's prove that we're here. This all stems out of a much longer history. In 1989, a number of Sinixt people went from the Colville Reservation up to Canada to take part in a road blockade. The Canadians were building a road through Sinixt territory, and they were going to destroy some really sacred ground and potentially some artifacts and a burial ground. And so it sort of stems from that this true effort and this deep and long-term effort to bring recognition to a tribe that is alive and well here in Washington State.
This issue also at the conference that you were up there when you were talking with this group of people, there was some other news made outside of just the Sinixt about some salmon also being returned to the upper Columbia River. And I think we joke around here that everything in the Northwest relates back to salmon or wolves. And so in this case, we're going to bring it back to salmon. And so I know there's a lot of fisher people out there who care about salmon and fisheries in the Northwest. But tell us about this possibility of salmon being returned to the upper Columbia above Grand Coulee Dam, as I understand, for the first time, obviously, in 70 years since the dam was built. Why has it taken so long to get salmon around the dam?
Well, fish haven't been able to make it past two dams, actually. It's the Chief Joseph Dam and the Grand Coulee Dam since 1942. That was when work was completed on the construction of these dams. And then since the 1980s, there have been a number of efforts to research the possibilities of driving the salmon around the dams and, putting them back in the waters above the dams. But it's gotten really complicated in terms of looking at how to return salmon to the upper reaches of the Columbia. Things have been studied, everything from water temperature to water quality. There's been issues around flood control. There are concerns that annual drawdowns with the Grand Coulee and Chief Joseph dams could impact juvenile fish and eggs that could be washed downstream. So there's just been all of this complicated stuff that people have to look at. They've finally done that research. And so at the end of this summer, they're thinking sometime in mid-August, fish that are at the Chief Joseph hatchery that is run by the Colville tribes will be trucked above Grand Coulee Dam. All of those feasibility studies are complete and they're sort of ready to move. And what they're going to do is they're going to mark these fish with what's called a pit tag. And then they swim through these little gates, and the gates sort of pick up the signal from these pit tags. And so they'll be able to track the fish and look at where they're going above the dam. So then they can figure out what the next step is, where the good habitat is, where do the fish want to go, is it feasible, can they survive? So there's a lot more research and studies that need to happen after these fish are put above the dam. So this is the first step in what is a much longer process in what can happen to fish above the Grand Coulee. There's also a huge cultural component to this. So the tribes in this region fished above the Grand Coulee Dam for generations, and they haven't been able to do so since 1942. And those tribes include the Spokanes, the 12 tribes that make up the Confederated Tribes of the Colville, the Coeur d'Alenes, the Kalispels, and the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho. There's also another complication. So in Canada, there are dams above the Grand Coulee. So whether or not these fish will ever be able to make it back to their headwaters, even further up in the Northern Rockies that split British Columbia and Alberta, is still up for discussion.
Who grew up in the Coulee Dam area, literally right below the dam. You could see my parents' house from pictures above the dam. This is going to be a really fascinating topic to explore and to follow. Got to give a quick shout out to my peeps in Coulee and Nespelem area. So hey everyone. So let's move on to another topic that of big intrigue in the Northwest beyond salmon and wolves. Fire is always on our minds, especially now as we're entering fire season. You were just at a conference in Yakima of regional fire managers. What was covered there, and what's some of the news coming out of there?
I wish I could say it was good news and we were going to be fire free this summer, but I absolutely can't say that. What we have learned, so we heard from a couple meteorologists who work for the Northwest Coordination Center, and we heard that across Oregon, we're looking at poor snowpack in most of the state, and drought areas there are expanding throughout central and eastern Oregon, especially. And then in Washington, the snowpack was pretty near to what we saw last year at this time, which was interesting to me because I felt like we had a low snow year. But I guess we are sort of where we were at last year, which is good news. Where we will see some increased fire danger heading into the season as the spring progresses is in the Western Columbia Basin in Washington from about Trout Lake to Ellensburg. And then in Oregon, what they were saying is that it feels a lot like building up to what we saw in 2015. And what we saw in 2015 were record-setting wildfires. So one thing I do want to sort of mention that I think is really important is that we're going to see wildfire. We're going to see wildfire even in Washington State, even if we're not in the Western Columbia Basin. We're going to see wildfire in parts of Oregon that maybe aren't experiencing drought conditions. It's just kind of the way of the West. And that's a bit of a changing attitude in fire management as well, is starting to look at fire as a good thing, and part of this larger ecological system.
Emily, fire is a big part of the Northwest, and we had a question come in, and it made me think of, you've covered fire, I've covered fire. It sounds like an Oprah thing. You've fought fire, you've got fire, you've all got fire. But and I've been in fire camps, and it's always struck me of seeing like how massive these fire camps are with and how the operation is, and that means that all these economies of a lot of small towns, particularly in eastern Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, sometimes depend on the money, frankly, that comes from firefighting. Have you encountered like any concern about how, as we change our priorities in firefighting, that some of the large economies and people's livelihoods that are dependent, frankly, on firefighting might start to change as well?
Oh, the economics of fire. We could talk for years on this, Scott. I think that we're starting to see a little bit more money come from the state, specifically in Washington, for more prescribed burn work, which has been a challenge because the permitting process and with air quality has been very complicated. There is some money in the state budget this year for mapping what's called the WUI. I love saying that WUI. It stands for Wildland Urban Interface. And that map will go towards, shared information for counties in Washington State. We also got $1.7 million in Washington as part of the supplemental budget to go directly towards firefighting. So at the state level, we're seeing a little bit more money. There is some money in the federal budget this year. Finally, once it passed, that will go towards firefighting in the West, specifically to Forest Service efforts. But that fire borrowing, that controversial fire borrowing, taking money from other Forest Service programs and other agency programs to pay for wildfire and to respond to damage from wildfire, that is not a problem that is going to be solved for another 2 years, according to this year's federal budget. So it's just a complicated, ongoing conversation.
Certainly is, and you're right. Something we could talk about weeks at a time, and we'll have you back again, of course, to talk as we go throughout the summer and fall into the full-on fire season. Emily Schwing, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. Emily, you can find all of her reporting at NWPB.org. She's there based in Spokane, and she's roaming around the Northwest talking about fire, salmon, and tribal issues and everything in between. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily. And you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter, NWP Broadcasting. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us in the unique Northwest.